Help me grow, fast or slow, as long as I know you're digging for gold. Help me learn, soft or stern, as long as I know you're digging for gold. Life's a movie, the ultimate trip. You should have been told you'd be digging for gold. Hello, my friends, and welcome to another episode of Digging for Gold. This is episode 68. Don't forget, go to dangoldberg.com or go to the actual individual sites and go to YouTube at dan.goldberg and subscribe. You can go to Spotify for Digging for Gold and follow us. Follow us on Instagram at dan.goldberg and TikTok at Digging for Gold. I got to tell you something. Today, you're in for a treat.
Oh, boy.
Because this man is so interesting and is doing so many very cool things. Without further ado, here's Jonathan Goldstein, lawyer, entrepreneur, board member, and really a pretty funny guy. We were laughing
You're very
pretty
kind.
well
Thank
before
you.
the cameras rolled. So, Jonathan, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Grateful for the opportunity to be here today with you in the studio.
It's great. It's great. And so you got a very interesting story.
Thank you.
You are a lawyer.
It's true. Guilty as charged.
What kind of lawyer are you? What's your specialty?
So I have a little bit of a varied practice. I have a general practice focus on other entrepreneurs. So I'll represent people, who are buying companies, selling companies, small business, medium-sized businesses. I have a specialized practice where I have a couple of highly regulated areas where I do work. So I have a firearms law practice that is nationwide. I also have a practice in aviation law and in election law. So I have expertise in these very, very specialized areas. Wow. And we represent companies from the very largest. We've taken two terms ago, we took a case all the way to the United States Supreme Court. And, if you had a dog bite, if we knew you and we trusted you, we'd consider helping you out with that too.
And if your dog bit you in the Supreme Court.
In the Supreme Court, we'd help you with that too.
That's great.
Yeah.
So okay. So wait a minute now. I want to get back to firearms law, election law.
It's true.
Do you deal with like fraud in elections?
Yeah. So ever since I was in law school, I had been doing election law. I've actually rewritten several parts of Pennsylvania's election law, were texts that I actually at one point drafted and were adopted into law. And my very first client as an election lawyer actually was Ralph Nader.
Oh,
and
that's cool.
I was practicing law as a student lawyer. So there's a rule in Pennsylvania that as a third-year law student, if an admitted lawyer agrees to supervise you, you can practice law.
Wow.
And I was working on the Bush election in 2004, and we were at the warehouse in Philadelphia, the election warehouse,
right,
where they were challenging signatures on nominating petitions. The Democrats were trying to have Nader knocked off the ballot, and the Republicans were trying to keep him on under the theory that he would dilute Democratic votes. So you could see where the incentives ran.
Sure.
So I showed up down at that warehouse, and they were breaking lawyers and for each side into little groups and sending them off to handle challenges to these ballots. And they ran out of lawyers on the Republican side.
Wow.
So I was there helping some other lawyers, and there was a Commonwealth Court judge who was presiding. And I very foolishly or bravely, you'll have to decide, sort of raised my hand and said, Your Honor, you'll please forgive me for interjecting. And if you don't want to hear from me, I certainly understand. But it's my understanding that there is a law in Pennsylvania that permits a third-year law student under supervision of an admitted lawyer to practice law with the permission of the lawyers involved and with the permission of the court. And to the extent I could be useful, I am a third-year law student, I would volunteer to do that if one of these fine lawyers would agree to supervise me. And I knew half the lawyers in the room, and one from the Democrats and one for Republicans, both who were known to me, sort of looked at each other and they said, sure. So she swore me in, and I was admitted to practice law in Pennsylvania prior to graduating law school.
Wow.
And participated. And the judge ultimately thought I did a pretty good job. So.
And was Nader on the ballot?
Nader was kept on the ballot. We kept him on the ballot.
Pretty cool. Pretty cool. Because he did call me. He said, Dan, when Jonathan's in the podcast, please tell him I said
Please
thank
tell
you.
him I said hello.
And
yeah.
he drove up in his Chevette. or Chevelle,
Right. A Corvair. Too,
Corvair, that's
right,
what it was.
exactly.
A Corvair,
Right.
you're right.
Dangerous at any speed, right?
right, even when it's parked. It was
Exactly.
like amazing. So, all right, so you do election law.
I do.
And what was it? Wait, you said something else.
Aviation law.
Aviation law. That must be flighty.
It's a little flighty. Yes. We try to achieve liftoff. Right? But I am actually a licensed commercial pilot.
Wow.
So as I got involved in aviation, I found that there were a lot of gaps in that world in terms of the offering that a lot of lawyers were able to put out there, and I got up to speed for my own purposes. Some of it is tax law in terms of the way you acquire aviation assets and some of the nuances of that. Some of it is regulatory law about how a pilot is licensed and how he loses his license and how aircraft are managed and all that sort of stuff. And
Wow.
I came sufficiently up to speed on it that other pilots, other owners started to come to me for advice. And I said, all right, well, I guess I'm doing this.
I'm calling you if I get in drone trouble.
You can, yeah. You have to be a licensed pilot to operate certain kinds of drones. Yeah.
We did have a number of shows back. David Lax, who was a combat pilot during Vietnam and then became a commercial pilot for Alaska Airlines. That'd be interesting for you guys to speak to each other.
Absolutely, yeah.
You
So
know.
I don't have what's called ATP, but I have a commercial license.
What's ATP?
Airline transport pilot. That's what you have to fly for United or American.
Oh, okay.
The commercial license is what you have to hold out to take money to fly people. You have to have a commercial license.
I get
So
it.
charter,
Right.
if you owned an airplane and you wanted me to move your airplane for you, that you'd have to have a commercial license.
But otherwise, you can fly your own.
Yeah, that would be a private pilot license.
Yeah.
You can fly your own plane for your own purposes.
What does the Iron Maiden Bruce Dickinson guy have?
That I don't know. I'm not
Right.
familiar with his licensure, but
I guess it depends on whether he owns the plane.
correct, right.
Yeah.
So a guy like John Travolta, for example, is an ATP. But I think that a guy like Indiana Jones is, I think, just a private pilot. So
Got it. Yeah. And by the way, when you hear that voice
Yeah.
that you can't see the person,
Yeah.
that's Alex.
hello, Alex.
Alex Daly, our editor and producer.
Excellent.
So, okay. So now I want to get into the other, before we get into the businesses.
Sure.
Okay. I think everybody's heard of guns. Okay.
Most people have.
Yeah. And there's all kinds of people that want to have their opinions about guns.
True.
But there's laws about guns.
There are.
Right? That you know very well, and you sit on the board of the National Rifle Association.
It's
right?
true. I was elected in April of 2005, and I'm here, and we'll talk about guns today. Of course, at all times, I'm speaking in my own capacity. I'm not speaking on behalf of the board, but I am a member of that board.
Cool. So, what are the gun laws in Pennsylvania? An overview.
Well, so the good news for all of your listeners and your viewers is that about a month ago I released a book called Pennsylvania Firearms Law. So
Wow,
you can find it
okay.
on Amazon,
Oh.
and there are copies of it available. I also released a book called Why the Firearms Laws Are What They Are, because a lot of people think they know how those laws should be changed, and this book is a foundational document that can help people understand why the laws are configured in the way that they are. I am at all times, a pro-gun advocate.
Right.
But the book is a real effort to reach out to people who don't look at the world the way that I do, and give them the foundation that they need to be engaged in a conversation, a reasonable conversation about why things are arranged the way they are.
It's interesting because people scream and yell
All the
about
time.
political stuff, screaming and yelling, and I'll give you a personal view of things. I forever was anti-gun, forever, and then one day, a fellow said to me, he was a patient of mine at my optical company. He said, you realize, of course, that the first thing that Hitler outlawed were guns. And if people would have had guns, maybe he wouldn't have succeeded.
So a friend of mine named Steve Holbrook, is a professor, lives down in Virginia, wrote a book called The Nazi Origins of Gun Control. And he traces that back, that the Gun Control Act of 1968, which was written here, we have good evidence that a lot of the foundational texts that were used to think through how that law should be configured drew upon some of the gun control statutes that had been raised in Germany in the 30s. Yeah, I mean, the first thing that virtually every dictator, whether it was Pol Pot or Stalin or Castro or any of these, nationalists, socialists, fascists want to do is control arms. Because if you can control arms, you don't have citizens, you have subjects.
And that's what happened in Iran.
The Iranian people, I bet right now, really wish they had arms the way that we do.
Yeah.
It's a precious right. It's the last emergency button for a people when they are being oppressed by their government, and Americans take it very seriously.
Yeah, it's very interesting to me. And that one guy who said that to me sent a spark to me and changed my perspective. I looked deeper into it, and I did realize that that's what they did, and that the populace was at a complete disadvantage.
A complete disadvantage. And, my awakening around guns was very similar. They were changing the gun laws here in Pennsylvania in 1994. And there was a big effort to, this is pre-Heller, pre-McDonald. The Second Amendment was thought to be dead letter law, like the Third Amendment, which prevents the quartering of soldiers in homes, right? It was thought to have been settled in the 1939 case of Miller, and basically read out of the Constitution. So they were changing the gun laws here in Pennsylvania, and I was watching the debates and watching what the politicians were saying, and a fundamental question occurred to me. What is it that you intend to do to me that my owning a gun is so threatening to you? Meaning, thinking of the political class.
Yeah.
What is it? It's just an object. It sits on the shelf in my home. What's the big deal? And I started to look into it, and I realized, it's an incredibly big deal.
It is.
It's an incredibly big deal.
And the other thing that the more I looked into it, the more I began to question, is that every state controls their gun laws. It's really not federal. For instance, if you carry a gun in Pennsylvania and you don't have, and correct me if I'm wrong, and you don't have the permit, the license to carry it in New Jersey, you are breaking New Jersey law.
That is 100% correct. As one of my good friends who used to work at the NRA before, sadly, he passed away, my friend Chris Conti used to say, New Jersey is the North Korea of gun ownership. It is a terrible place to be a gun owner, even with a carry permit, which they're now forced to give since the Bruin ruling. They've put so many exceptions and caveats, and many times in the course of a year, we see a Pennsylvanian who drives across the bridge. They have a Pennsylvania license to carry a firearm. They're trying to do the right thing. They alert the police as they get over the bridge. If they get pulled over, officer, I have a license to carry a firearm, and I have the firearm on me. And the police officer will say, is it a New Jersey license or a Pennsylvania license? It's a Pennsylvania license. They pull him out of the car, and they arrest him. And the carrying of a firearm in New Jersey without a license is a mandatory 3-year minimum sentence. Mandatory 3-year minimum sentence. And it can only be waived in very narrow circumstances by a prosecutor. I got a phone call from an Orthodox Jewish friend here in Philadelphia. Had a guy who was in his community, kept a gun in his tallis bag to take with him to services every morning here in Pennsylvania for reasons that should be obvious given the environment. And he went to Newark to take a flight and forgot that he had it in his bag and was arrested. And they called me to say, what's going to happen? And I said, there is a non-zero, greater than 50% chance that your friend is going to spend 3 years in a New Jersey prison.
Oh, my God.
And they said, well, what can we do? What can we do? And I said, well, I hooked him up with the proper resources. And I said, there's a very, very narrow path for him to stay out of prison. New Jersey is a terrible place to be a gun owner or a gun possessor.
Wow.
Yeah.
I had
Be
no
very
idea.
careful.
No idea. So is there, or are there states that it's you can cross borders.
Yeah, so there is
Universal carry.
Yeah, we're seeking universal carry. It's a priority of the NRA right now is
Right.
nationwide reciprocal concealed carry. Right now, we have compacts that have been formed between various states to recognize concealed carry, but it's a state-by-state negotiated arrangement. In Pennsylvania, it's negotiated by the Attorney General's office. So if you go to the Attorney General's website, which in Pennsylvania is attorneygeneral.gov, they publish a map and the corresponding documentation to show where Pennsylvania has reciprocal privileges. Many of our bordering states do not reciprocate with us.
Yeah, so how do
Delaware
you
and
get-
Maryland, New Jersey do not reciprocate. New York. So you can pick up Delaware reciprocity via Florida. So you can apply for a Florida non-resident permit. You do that through Florida's Department of Agriculture. You can do the whole thing by mail. It's good for 7 years. And Florida gives you Delaware. But there are even problems with that. So, for example, there's a federal law that talks about gun-free school zones.
Yes.
And when you're carrying in what's called a federal gun-free school zone, you are allowed to carry into a gun-free school zone if you possess a permit from the state in which the school is located. So if you're carrying in Delaware on a Florida reciprocal permit, you don't have a Delaware permit. And so if you pass through a gun-free school zone, it is arguable you could be prosecuted. Now, query whether federal gun-free school zones are even constitutional. So very quickly with gun law, you wind up right down the rabbit hole.
Wow.
It is a crazy, crazy patchwork of state and federal laws. But broadly speaking, you can get reciprocity for Delaware with Florida.
How does it work for, like, we're talking self-defense mainly right now, but is it a little different for hunting?
Yeah, so for example, New Jersey,
Like people duck hunt in Jersey,
I duck
right?
hunt in
Yeah.
New Jersey. So the way it works, the advice I give people is you should get a full season hunting license for the state of New Jersey. What a lot of preserves will do is tell you, travel here to our preserve in New Jersey, and the day of, we'll sell you a permit. The one-day permit.
Yeah, but you.
Yeah.
That's it. The problem is, as soon as you cross the border from Pennsylvania into New Jersey, on your way to getting a one-day permit, you don't have a permit.
Right.
So I tell people that if they're going to do it, they should buy the full season permit or call the preserve and tell them to sell them a license over the phone, date it for the day you're going to be traveling, and send you a photograph of it so you have it in the car. But it is a very, very fraught environment to travel with guns into or through New Jersey. The Third Circuit's defining case on interstate travel with a firearm is a case called Revell, where a guy named Revell was traveling from Utah, I believe, on his way to somewhere in New England. And he missed his connecting flight. Missed his connecting flight, and he was traveling with firearms. And in missing his connecting flight, the airline refused to hold the firearms overnight. So Mr. Revell took the firearms back. They said, if you don't take these firearms, we're going to cancel the rest of your ticket. You have to take them. So he went to a hotel room in or around Newark Airport, came back the next morning to check his firearms in. As is the practice and custom of the airlines there, when you're going to check firearms in, they summon the Port Authority police. So the Port Authority police arrive. They ask him, where'd you get these firearms? He says, well, I was traveling. I, suffered travelus interruptus, and took them to a hotel room overnight, and they arrested him. And he said, what was I supposed to do? They were going to, and the Third Circuit said that if you are not in what's called a continuous arc of travel, if you stop for any reason, a bathroom break, to get gas, certainly for overnight, even if it's not your fault, you lose the protection of what's called FOPA, the Firearms Owners Protection Act, which is a federal law that protects a firearm owner when he originates in a state where he's legal and is going to a state where he's legal. While he's in transit, he's protected by a federal law. As soon as you break that chain of travel, you lose that protection. Now, the BATFE, the Federal Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, the government's most fun department, right? Right. BATFE? Yes, please, right? But the BATFE just engaged in some rulemaking around this, and I entered a public comment that basically said they should read the rulemaking around this vastly more permissively, that a person who is in an arc of transit like that and who's obviously not trying to possess that firearm in transit should be able to stop, shop, take a bathroom break, eat a meal,
Right.
purchase gasoline.
Stop at one of those parkway exits.
Yeah, stop at a parkway exit. The idea is you should be able to
Rest stop.
make reasonable
Right.
stops. So hopefully BATFE's rulemaking on that will make it a little easier.
Well, what happened to this person?
So they eventually, as I recall, they dropped the charges, but he was suing for damages as a civil rights violation.
Right.
And the Third Circuit said no. And really, one of the worst legal decisions I've ever read. What they said was a person in transit who finds himself in these circumstances should ask the police for help to store his firearms overnight. Surely no law enforcement officer would compound an innocent traveler's troubles by refusing to take possession of the firearms on his behalf. That was what the Third Circuit wrote. And what that tells you about is an issue that is really epidemic in the federal courts, where you have people who graduate from highfalutin law schools, who go directly into some kind of a corporate practice, get shuttled around the world in black cars, go right into the judiciary, and never come into contact with the actual real world.
Right.
Where people are standing at an airport counter at 11:30 at night, having missed their flight. There's one Port Authority police officer there. He's not going to take your firearms for you. No way, right? What did they say
Right.
when they tried to see the Wizard of Oz? When Dorothy tried to see the Wizard of Oz, you remember she knocks on the door of the Emerald Castle, and the little guy pokes his head out, and she says, "I'd like to see the Wizard of Oz." And what does the little guy say? "Nobody gets to see the Wizard of Oz. Nobody, no how." Right? He's not taking your firearms. Nobody, no how. And it's just breathtakingly disconnected from the experience of regular people.
Yeah.
It's like a traffic stop. You have to be a constitutional lawyer to have a traffic stop go your way, or you wind up waiving all your rights. So we need better laws around some of these things, and that's what I advocate for.
Yeah. If it's the airline's fault, well, I know I'm just being repetitive.
You would think they have a duty
Yeah.
to keep the firearms.
Sure. Put it in a locker.
You try to lay these burdens, right? I mean, what is and I put this in the front piece to my books, right? What is the purpose of the law? The purpose of the law is in no small part to help people understand what we expect of them civilizationally.
Mm-hmm.
These are the rules. This is what we expect. And if you read these laws and comply with these rules, you can expect that your behavior will be excusable, right? That these are the things that you should do and can do and shouldn't do. And when we're making laws, we try to make them clear and fair, but we try to lay the burdens at the feet of the people who are most able to meet them, right? So in the context of a firearms owner who's traveling, who has the infrastructure to handle a problem like that? Is it the airline that everywhere they operate has to have a physical operation properly staffed to transport cargo and people that could easily put up locked containers where they can control biomedical cargo, animals, precious cargo, firearms, right? They have the infrastructure for that. Or do we lay that at the feet of a person who is in transit, who is definitionally not where they live,
Right.
not where they have resources, right? They're in transit. And do we lay it at that person's feet to comply with a complex regulatory apparatus that has criminal penalties attached to it? I think the question answers itself.
Yeah.
Right?
It answers itself. And the interesting thing is, if the guy would have said, "I don't want my guns," just hypothetically, I don't want my guns, that means that someone would have to hold those guns who could then be arrested.
Correct. Or the airline would have to take them, or the police would have to take them.
Yeah.
Now, if it were me, for example, say I were headed down to the Ben Franklin Bridge,
Right.
okay, and the police, there's an accident, and I wasn't going to get on the bridge, but they say, no, everybody's got to go across the bridge, okay? If I happened to be armed, if I had firearms in my car, I would literally put the car in park and say, I will not cross that bridge. You can arrest me. You can tow my car. I will not cross that bridge.
Or do you ever miss that turn?
Yeah, right. And next thing you know, you're on the bridge.
I know,
If
and
that
you're
were
in
me,
Camden, yeah.
before I got halfway across that bridge, I would stop, I would put my hazard lights on, and I would wait. And I would tell them, there is nothing you can do short of physically restraining me and carrying me bodily against my will across this bridge into New Jersey with these firearms. I won't do it because I'd be subject to arrest.
Yeah. And does that hold true for in transit? Okay. Let's say you're going from Pennsylvania to Florida.
Right.
Okay. Both have carry laws and everything else.
Let's assume I'm legal where I start
Right.
and legal where I'm ending.
Yeah. Or the other thing is Pennsylvania to a state that doesn't have carry laws. Okay.
Vermont.
Vermont. Okay. Oh, Vermont. Okay. So, and you're going through it. Okay. Does it hold true for pistols, revolvers, and automatic rifles? Okay.
So automatic versus semi-automatic, we'll talk about
Automatic
that,
versus
right?
semi-automatic
So-
versus long guns versus pistols and revolvers.
So the issue, if you want to come under the protection of FOPA, Firearm Owners Protections Act, FOPA protects you when you are in transit with firearms, going from somewhere where you're legal to somewhere where you're legal, as long as it's a continuous arc of travel, and as long as the firearms are in the trunk of your car, in a locked container, unloaded, with the ammunition in a separate unlocked container.
Even if you're driving through another state that's
So if you're going through North Korea,
right,
you leave Pennsylvania, you enter North Korea,
right,
you then enter North Korea, state of New York. Right. You enter North Korea, state of Connecticut. North Korea, Massachusetts.
Right.
And then you wind up in Vermont. Okay? As you pass through all those North Koreas, you are legal as long as you're in a continuous arc of travel and the firearms are in locked containers in the trunk of your car, ammo and guns in separate containers.
What happens when you get to Vermont?
Now, because you're legal there, you can unbox and use your firearms consistent with the expectations of the laws of the state of Vermont.
Got it. Okay.
What if you have to act in self-defense while you're traveling? Has that ever happened?
Well, the problem will be, of course, that you have locked up your firearms
Yeah.
while you're in transit.
Right.
So there are, at times, what are called necessity defenses. So even people who are felons, for example, there are rare cases where a felon whose life was at risk picked up a firearm, even though they're prohibited from possessing firearms, and defended his life where he had no other choice. And there's a necessity defense. You know, a felon gets mugged.
Right.
And he wrestles for the gun with the mugger, comes up holding the gun, and the mugger comes at him again with, say, a knife. And the felon shoots the mugger. There's a necessity defense there. But it's very, very rare, and I wouldn't want to rely on it.
Yeah.
So you could make a necessity defense if you had to defend your life while in transit. But we wouldn't want to find ourselves there.
Yeah.
It's interesting. So, how many states, since we're on this topic, before we get to the other topics, how many states are guns have the same legality as, let's say, a Pennsylvania or a Florida or maybe a Texas?
Pennsylvania is a pretty good state.
Right.
One of the things your listeners and viewers should know that that's potentially at risk if the Pennsylvania Senate flips to Democratic control in the next election in November. They are using Josh Shapiro's, sacrilegiously large war chest to target several state senators, two in particular, for flipping their seats. And one of the things that the anti-gun left has promised is changes to Pennsylvania's otherwise very even-handed and pretty good gun laws. So Pennsylvania has long been a kind of, pretty strong gun place. Texas, of course, Florida, very good. Many of the western states are pretty good.
Montana, Wyoming.
Notwithstanding the fact that they're in the Ninth Circuit, which has long been very hostile to gun rights. New Hampshire, Vermont have long been pretty good. Many of the states in the Southeast, South Carolina has been pretty good. Georgia, North Carolina's not bad. Tennessee, of course, very, very good.
Colorado.
Colorado was good, flipped, and is now much worse. Colorado gun owners are under a lot of pressure right now. Phil Weiser, who is running for governor out there, who I happen to be friendly with his family and know them, is not a bad guy, but is beholden to a pretty progressive legislature and a pretty progressive group of supporters. Their gun laws are getting worse.
Hunter S. Thompson wouldn't have made it, right?
Wouldn't have made it, but the worst states in the country, I think I named it's your New Jersey's, your Connecticut's, your Massachusetts, your New York. D.C. is no panacea. Hawaii, California, very bad.
Because my uncle's a lawyer downtown, and he carries every day. And it's like, if that was Newark, if that was New York City, like Philadelphia is kind of unique that it's a little more lax, right?
Well, we have a uniformity clause in our laws. 18 PACS 6120 calls for our laws to be uniform. But the real issue is in the states where, there's a hodgepodge of laws, you can't carry into a restaurant that derives more than 50% of its receipts from the service of alcohol. How am I supposed to know that, right? I'm walking into a restaurant, right?
Right.
So the problem is, as a gun owner, somebody who carries, you're holstering and unholstering and putting in your car. And then they tell you can't lock it in your car. Well, where the hell am I supposed to put this gun? And the idea, of course, is
You get them to not have a gun.
they don't want you to have a gun.
Right.
They've made it such a hodgepodge thicket of misery that they want the gun owner to say, I'll leave it at home. Now, many gun owners who are committed won't do that. They'll take care and move the gun around like that. But from a safety standpoint, from a keeping peace in the community, shalom bayit, as we say in Yiddish or in Hebrew, you don't want people holstering and unholstering firearms in the street, putting in a lockbox in their car all the time, right? You want people, keeping that firearm in its holster. You want it living peaceably, on your hip all day, unless you need it for urgent reasons. So, so those hodgepodge states, they think they're doing themselves a favor. They're really, really not.
This is so interesting.
This is stuff. I mean, I talk about it with my friends and my family, and at some point they say, enough. Like we give. You know a lot about guns, but for the people who care about this stuff, to my mind, it's quite interesting.
Yeah, it's very interesting, and again, I refer back to the thing I said at the beginning, when I was a big proponent against guns. And that guy said that one line to me, and I went back and I did some research, and lo and behold, that was the truth.
It is. Let me
So it changed my perspective.
let me tell you a little bit. You mentioned automatic versus semi-automatic. Let's
Correct.
talk about that for a minute.
Okay.
So, first of all, let's get some definitions right. A semi-automatic firearm, one trigger pull, right? So I move my finger and pull a trigger one time, and I get one bullet coming out of that gun. That is a semi-automatic action. One trigger pull, one bullet. Those guns have been legal for civilians to possess since time immemorial. Fully automatic, one trigger pull, multiple bullets, okay? That would be your machine gun. Since the National Firearms Act passed in 1934, fully automatic firearms have been considered to be a special case of firearms that are not available to civilians. Now, come forward from 1934 to 1939. There's a case called Miller. Mr. Miller is arrested for carrying a sawed-off shotgun. The National Firearms Act of 1934 regulated certain categories of firearms. It regulated fully automatic firearms like machine guns. It regulated short-barreled rifles, what are called SBRs, okay, which is a long, normal rifle where they cut the barrel or cut the stock. And the idea is it was something you could carry over under an overcoat.
Right.
Short-barreled shotguns, right, same sort of deal where you saw off the shotgun. Destructive devices, bombs, grenades, things like that. And what they call any other weapon. Pen guns, briefcase guns, wallet guns, unusual
Derringer.
spyware,
Derringer, yeah.
right? Spyware. So Mr. Miller is arrested for having a sawed-off shotgun. Now, the curious case of Mr. Miller, I believe, is the name of an article written by another friend of mine, a guy named Dave Hardy. Dave Hardy is a really interesting Second Amendment scholar out in Arizona. And he went and pulled all the materials for the Miller case. Miller never appeared in the Supreme Court. He was destitute. And the lawyer who represented him when the case made its way to the Supreme Court, and it was maneuvered to being a Supreme Court case by lawyers who wanted to get the case before the Supreme Court, who were involved in the FDR administration. Miller didn't have enough money to keep his lawyer. So his lawyer basically wrote to the Supreme Court and said, please decide the case on whatever papers you have before you. Very curious case. Dave Hardy tracks the whole history of it. But what winds up happening is the Supreme Court rules that a sawed-off shotgun was not a Second Amendment arm because it was insufficiently tied to military service, right? Nobody in the military would use a sawed-off shotgun, was the Supreme Court's theory. Therefore, because the militia clause of the Second Amendment describes the kinds of arms that should be protected because they are the kinds of arms with which people needed to be familiar were they summoned into militia service, that a sawed-off shotgun was not a Second Amendment arm. And that was the end of the Second Amendment from 1939 all the way up to 2008 when the Heller decision is decided. Okay?
Wait a minute. So the Second Amendment didn't apply?
Basically, it allowed the federal government, it allowed people to say, we can do whatever we want, basically. They read it out of the Constitution with the Miller decision. And it was considered archaic dead-letter law. 2008.
So wait a minute. So you mean then people could carry or people could not carry?
They read it out of the law.
Oh, they read it out. So you couldn't do anything.
Federal law would provide you with very little in the way of protection.
I got it. So it was really up to the states.
It was up to the states, and basically the federal government let the states do whatever they want. Nobody brought successful Second Amendment cases.
Got it.
It was the redheaded stepchild of the Bill of Rights. Okay, it was people viewed it as a collective right, and so the federal government could regulate it out of existence. Right? It was about militias and militia service.
Right.
So you come forward to 2008.
Wow.
They bring the Heller
realize
case.
that. Yeah.
Dick Heller wants to he's a reserve police officer in D.C., and he wants to be able to keep a fully assembled pistol in his home unrelated to militia service. He wants to keep that firearm in his home for self-defense. And in 2008, the Supreme Court holds that the Second Amendment protects an individual right to have a fully assembled handgun, the firearm of choice for most people on a numerical basis, in common, quote, common use, fully assembled in your home for self-defense purposes, unrelated to militia service. Now we're off to the races, okay?
Wow.
2008, we reestablished the individual Second Amendment right. Right? David Souter goes crazy. The dissent goes crazy. This is madness. We're going to, people are going to have, rocket launchers. It's going to be total mayhem. You come forward a few years, by the McDonald decision, the Second Amendment is incorporated against the states, right? So this is a feature of the 14th Amendment where basically the certain parts of the Bill of Rights were deemed to be incorporated against the states, setting a minimum federal floor for a civil right. So, for example, a state cannot deny you your First Amendment rights because the First Amendment was deemed to be incorporated against the states via the 14th Amendment. The Second Amendment is incorporated under McDonald and now sets a minimum federal floor that says you can only infringe so far, even under your state constitution. There's a federal right.
Wow.
Okay? We're going somewhere with this.
Yeah.
So what the states start trying to do is defy Heller and defy McDonald. They're looking for anything they can do to make it miserable for the gun owner to have his right. And what they start to do is try to make illegal the possession of classes of firearms. The one they first start to go over that everybody wants to go over is the semi-automatic, right? We're now circling back to the definitions.
Yeah.
The semi-automatic rifle that is the most popular rifle platform in the country, and that is the AR-15. Now, most civilians will tell you, what does AR stand for? Assault rifle. Wrong. Incorrect. It stands for Armalite rifle. The Armalite Rifle 15 was the Model 15 of a rifle made by the Armalite Manufacturing Corporation, and it was the platform that the federal government ultimately adopted to be a military-style rifle that when it had a fully automatic setting on it, one trigger pull, multiple bullets, was a military arm. In its civilian incarnation, a part was removed, another part was put in that only allowed you to select safe or fire. Fire, of course, being semi-automatic fire, one trigger pull, one bullet. The notion was that if that platform were similar in every other way, that when a person was summoned into National Guard or militia service, he would have a familiarity with a platform that he would be called upon to use were he summoned into military service. Now, I'll take a little detour here and I will land the plane. A little detour. What was the reason the NRA was formed up? The reason the NRA was formed up in the 1870s was that, the 1870s, right, post-Civil War, was because it was the considered opinion of the generals who received American civilians into military service in the North, Union generals, that a tradition of marksmanship had not developed in the North. That when the North fought the South came to the war with a tradition of marksmanship and excellence around gun use. In the North, there was no such tradition. And if we were going to have a civilian military, right? We didn't remember standing armies were anathema to the founding fathers. Right. In the Constitution, a military, an army can only be funded for 2 years. Military appropriation bills are constitutionally limited to 2 years. Why? Because the founding fathers wanted to see a military in the United States that was grounded in civilian militia, right? And my friend Dave Kopel has written some excellent articles around this. But it was supposed to be a civilian militia where you had citizens who could be summoned into military service and then would return, right? Like Cincinnatus.
Right, Cincinnatus.
Right? The archetypal Roman general would return to their civilian roles.
Yes, and they sometimes would call George Washington the American Cincinnatus.
Correct, which is why the Society of the Cincinnatus in the United States is people who served, the descendants of people who served as officers in Washington's army.
Yes.
But the idea was that we needed to make sure that we had a diffuse base of civilians who knew how to shoot. So the NRA was formed up, and for much of its history, well into the 20s, 30s, and even into the 60s, ran shooting competitions and marksmanship competitions. That's what it was largely about, was gun safety and marksmanship. So you come forward into a post-Heller era, and you have states like New Jersey trying to ban the AR-15 platform. It's a weapon of war. It's destructive. Well, what the Supreme Court said in the Bruin decision, which was the next one after Heller, right? So, excuse me, after McDonald. Heller, then McDonald, then Bruin. What they said was, if you want to ban a gun, if you want to restrict a firearm right, the restriction must be anchored in history, text, and tradition from the founding era. Why? Because what the Supreme Court said is, the Bill of Rights is a deal. It's a deal that the people made with their government. And when the people made that deal with their government, they had an understanding of the deal they were making. These are the powers that we are talking about when we ceded control over certain things and removed control over certain things. This is the deal we were making. And if you want to restrict a right, any right in the Bill of Rights, in modernity, you have to look back to the founding era and understand the deal that the people thought they made. And that is
a contract.
It's a contract.
Right.
And so today, in modernity, when you seek to ban guns, you have to be able to provide a historical analog from the founding era. So just recently, the Third Circuit, which is the federal circuit court, the appellate court, that governs Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Delaware, and the U.S. Virgin Islands, okay?
Which is odd.
Which is odd. They had to put it somewhere.
Yeah.
And candidly, why did they put it there? Frankly, it's a plum. The
Yeah.
Third Circuit judges get to go down there every once in a while. They're not paid the way they would if they're in private practice.
Oh, my
They-
mom's uncle was one of those. He died down there.
Yeah, they get to go to the
Yeah.
Virgin Islands. The Second Circuit got Puerto Rico, so they get to go down there, right? But anyway, the Third Circuit ruled on this case, and the majority of Third Circuit judges ruled that the AR-15 platform is protected. It is protected because it is the kind of arm with which civilians would be expected to be familiar were they summoned into militia service, exactly the argument I made earlier.
Right.
And because of its commonality, right? You can't take a gun that is diffusely owned, is the most popular rifle platform in America, and ban it because it is the kind of gun that civilians have said through widespread purchase and possession that they wish to have available to them. Now, I wrote an article in the wake of this decision, which came out just a few months ago. You can find my article up on the Social Sciences Research Network, SSRN. What did I say in my article? My article speaks to several of the dissenting judges in that New Jersey case. And it says something very important to them. And it says something also to the Supreme Court, because the Supreme Court just took up what they call a black rifles case, AR-15s. They just agreed to take a case because there's now a circuit split. Some circuits have said, no, you can ban these AR-15s. Third Circuit said you can't. The Supreme Court has agreed to resolve the case. What my article talks about is what was that understanding in the founding era? How would we come to understand what the deal was that the founders understood? Well, we can look to the text, history, and tradition. That is what the Supreme Court said when Justice Thomas wrote the decision in Bruin. Text, history, and tradition. Well, how would we come to know the text, history, and tradition? Well, we start with the texts. And when you look at the Constitution, you will observe in Article 1. Stop me, by the way, if this is crazy talk.
No, it's not crazy talking. Actually, what it's doing, like as I'm listening to you, I in my olden days, I would say yes, but it was written when there were muskets.
Correct.
Okay, so how did they bridge the musket to the AR-15?
Very easy. When the Fourth Amendment was written, that we should be free of unreasonable searches and seizures, there were no computers, there were no cell phones, there were no airplanes.
Right.
Right? So does that mean because there was not an airplane in 1788 when they adopted the Constitution, or 1791 when they adopted the Bill of Rights, that I can search an airplane with impunity? No, we analogize, right? We analogize all the time. There were no computers. Because I do my writing on a computer, do I not have a First Amendment right to type, or do I have to go get a printing press with a squeeze board the way that Ben Franklin printed his newspapers, right? So we analogize
It made
all the
a
time.
mess of my dad.
Made a mess. So in the modern era, we analogize. But how do we analogize? Well, we look back to the founding era. Let's look to the text of the Constitution. If you look at Article 1 of the Constitution, right, this is what Rick Santorum used to do when he was a U.S. Senator, and he would get into constitutional discussions with people. He'd say, what does Article 1 of the Constitution even cover? What's the body of information that it covers? Article 1 is about the powers of Congress. Article 2 is about the powers of the presidency. Article 3, the powers of the judiciary, right? So when we describe a Third Circuit judge, a federal judge, we describe that judge as an Article 3 judge. It means they were appointed pursuant to Article 3 of the Constitution. What are the president's powers? Well, we look to Article 2, his power to pardon, his power to do other things in Article 2. Article 1 is the enumerated powers of the Congress, right? Our federal government is a government of limited, enumerated powers. It only can do what's on the list of Article 1. One of the Article 1 powers is that it prohibits states from keeping a navy. States cannot keep navies. Only Congress can keep a navy.
I think Pennsylvania had a navy before the Revolution.
So it may have, but in the Constitution, we reserve to Congress the authority to have a federal navy. That's one thing. The second thing we do is we give Congress the power to issue something called a letter of marque and reprisal, M-A-R-Q-U-E, and reprisal. What the hell is a letter of marque and reprisal? Well, we dig in. A letter of marque and reprisal is basically a way that civilized nations used to turn piracy, which was outside the law, into commerce raiding, which was a recognized part of the laws of war, right? Pirates were deemed to be hosti humanus generis, the enemy of all mankind. When you encountered a pirate on the high seas as part of a navy, okay, you could kill pirates wherever you found them because they were the enemy of all mankind. They raided, they raped, they killed, they tortured, they burned, wherever they were. And so they were considered to be outside the laws of mankind and could be killed wherever they were found.
R.
R, right? What's a pirate's favorite letter?
R.
You would think it's the R, but it's really the C. That's a joke from my children's school. So anyway, so pirates were the enemy of all mankind and be killed anywhere. But commerce raiding was very much a part of the laws of war in the 16th, 17th, 18th, 19th century.
Queen Victoria was really I think it was her, was really into her privateers.
Right. So that's what they were, privateers.
Walter Raleigh and
they were commerce raiders who had been granted a governmental charter.
Francis Drake.
To go out and raid.
Right.
To go out and raid commerce. And what they would do is they would seize a ship in commerce raiding, they would drag it back to a prize court, and the prize court would adjudicate who got what from the seizure of the goods. Now, in modernity, this would be a wonderful way, if you think about it, to handle, for example, Iranian and Chinese trade in illicit oil.
Right.
Congress issues letters of marque and reprisal. Private parties would go out, grab these ships, bring them to prize courts, and they would be liquidated and adjudicated. Set that aside for the moment. But we're talking about gun rights.
Right.
So how do we get from letters of marque and reprisal to gun rights? Well, let's think for a moment. When the Congress issues a letter of marque and reprisal, to whom is it issuing that letter? Let's think for a minute. To whom is it issuing that letter? It's not issuing it to a state. Why? Because we know that a state doesn't have a navy. If the federal government itself wanted to commerce raid with its navy, with the ships that it built and that it owned, would it need to issue a letter of marque and reprisal? No. The direction would be given from the president to the secretary of the navy to tell its ships to go out and commerce raid, and that would be the government directing its own actions. To whom did we issue letters of marque and reprisal then? Private parties. What does this presuppose? This presupposes that you have large ships owned by private parties, covered in cannon, filled to the brim with gunpowder, that were privately owned. And the letter of marque and reprisal clause was enacted in 1788 when the Constitution is adopted. The Second Amendment is adopted in 1791 by the same people. So these same people who knew of the existence of privately owned, heavily armed ships covered in cannon are the ones who passed the Second Amendment, which meant that they anticipated the private ownership of military arms.
Wow.
We know that they had it. And how do we know? We go look at the 1,700 letters of marque and reprisal that were issued over the years that are part of the collection of the Library of Congress. And we see that they published a form that said, we hereby issue a letter of marque and reprisal to this ship, fill in the blank, with this many cannon, fill in the blank, right? We know that these letters of marque and reprisal were issued. So when the Third Circuit dissenting judges say that the gun is too military in character to be possessed by civilians, It is wrong because we know that the Congress that adopted both the Constitution and the Second Amendment knew of the existence of privately owned cannon in America.
Wow.
And we know that they issued those letters of marque and reprisal to those very people who had the cannon. Moreover, their position that it's too military in character cannot be reconciled with the 1939 Miller decision, where Miller couldn't carry a shotgun because the shotgun was insufficiently military in character for him to possess it.
Wow.
So you have Miller, you have modern guns that are military in character, and you have the letter of marque and reprisal. I don't know how the gun control people expect to prevail on this point when this black gun case gets to the Third Circuit.
When was the last marque and reprisal letter issued?
Great question. Probably during the Civil War.
Okay.
Okay.
So we haven't had any since then.
Probably not, though it's a congressional power laying right there in the
It's right there.
Constitution.
Yeah, you could still do it.
Congress could do it tomorrow. So my view on that, that was a very long arc to get there. But the article I just released lays out this history of the letters of marque and reprisal, talks a little bit about Miller.
That is so interesting.
Carthago delenda est. Carthage must be destroyed.
You speak Latin as well.
A little bit. Cucullit non facit monachum. The hood does not make the monk.
Man, this is amazing. So that does that mean I have to get rid of my battleship?
You do not.
No, I
Indeed,
don't.
there is a credible case that
Yeah, I don't have to.
there is a credible case that you could buy another one.
Yeah, like somebody said to me, "Why don't you get rid of your battleship?"
Right.
And I said, "Marque and reprisal."
I was issued a letter of marque and reprisal.
Yeah.
Talk to Congress.
That's incredible. I never knew that.
Nobody
But most
knew that.
people do. Yeah.
So my article is a piece of original scholarship on this point. It references, there was another scholar who sort of made mention of it several years ago, but never chased it to ground. I chased it to ground and just published on that.
Damn. That is pretty cool, huh?
It's fun.
It is
So-
fun. People don't realize it. And all those people that are saying do away with.
They don't have a historical leg to stand on. The test that was laid out in Bruin by Thomas is text, history, and tradition, and the text, history, and tradition absolutely positively support civilian ownership of heavy armaments.
Wow. Think of that, folks.
We having fun yet?
This is amazing. It's amazing. So, we could sit here for hours because we haven't even gotten into your businesses.
You're very kind.
We haven't gotten the whole Second Amendment stuff. So when you teach, right, you teach a course in this.
I do. I teach a course at the law school at Penn
Right,
on the Second Amendment.
right.
And we're starting again in the fall. I'll be teaching on Thursday evenings. And I've got, it looks like about 45 students signed up who want to learn about this.
Wow.
And not all of them, by the way, are pro-gun. And I've said this to the kids that come to the class.
That's okay.
Look, here's the thing, okay? I am pro-gun. I'm avowedly pro-gun. I will occasionally make a snarky comment about anti-gun people. If you're prepared to live with that, I hope you can. But I really have developed a reputation in the field as one of the most pro-gun guys with whom an anti-gun guy could still have a reasonable conversation.
Yes, and that's what we lack in
It's what
this
we
country.
need. I live in this middle place here. And what I'll
Yeah.
tell you, I'm convicted in my beliefs, right?
Right.
I'm pro-gun, but we can have a conversation. And what I've said to my students is, I need able-bodied people on the other side of this issue from me. And the way that those people are going to become able-bodied is I'm going to teach them the black letter law. And I'm going to show them how this is supposed to come together and why we're here. In my course, I go back actually to Magna Carta, right?
I was there when it was written, and
Right?
it's pretty cool.
You
yeah.
go back, I go back to Hastings and Magna Carta and the Glorious Revolution, and what I do is I talk about why in the hell do we even have a constitution? What were we trying to do? Because if you don't understand that, if you don't understand where the framers were coming from, none of this stuff in modernity makes sense. All it is in modernity is Congress has this plenary power to do whatever it wants, and we made a law and you can't do that. Wrong. There was a division of labor, there was a division of power between the states, the people, and Congress, and there were reasons for it. There's a division of labor between Congress, the president, and the courts, and there were reasons for this. And it was designed to make power diffuse and closest to the people who it would affect.
You know why they had to take the Bastille in the French Revolution?
Tell me.
For the gunpowder.
Correct. Well, Lexington and Concord, the first shots in the Civil War, the Revolutionary War, the British marched to Lexington and Concord. Why? What were they doing there? They were seizing the powder magazines. It was the seizure of the gunpowder that caused the first shots to be fired.
Or what was that? Wasn't there like a mini around the Civil War? Didn't someone what was it, John Brown, take an armory?
He took an armory. I mean, that was the point, is that the control of arms was absolutely foundational in these fights.
And it's interesting to me when we talk about the Constitution and the freedom of speech in the Constitution. I've been to a number of countries that seem like ours, okay? Seem like America. They have constitutions. And all of a sudden, somebody gets arrested for saying something. And I go, why did they arrest them? Well, there's no freedom of speech in the Constitution.
Look at poor England.
Yeah.
I mean, the British people are suffering. They want to change their form of government. They want, they've spoken. I think they want less immigration. Good or bad, I'm not going to take a position on that.
Right.
But they've spoken that they want that. And what is their government doing? It arrests people who espouse that position. It arrests people who, for the blasphemy laws are coming back in Britain. It's an outrage. And unfortunately for the British, they gave up their arms. And if they have to use the emergency escape valve to change their form of government, they don't have it anymore.
Wait, the British don't have the right to carry a gun?
No, they've given it up. And in fact, if I grabbed my phone, I would show you. I have an ad that ran in American newspapers during the World War. I believe it ran during World War I. It was a committee that was formed to get Americans to send arms to the British. Literally, any spare gun you had lying around, please send it to England so we could defend ourselves.
Oh, my God.
Yeah, I'll send it to you. You can put it up with the podcast or the video.
Yeah, Alex.
Yeah, it's an amazing little ad that ran for the British.
I think a lot of anti-gun people just have. I'm fairly in between. I don't own any, and if we have more time, we can talk about. We were talking about it a little earlier. I have my weed card, and you have to choose one or two.
You do.
Where is he going with this? But anyway, I think a lot of anti-gun people just kind of have normalcy bias, and they're against bad gun owners because you hear statistics of it's more likely to kill someone in the house, or if someone has poor mental health, or something like that. You know what I mean?
People with mental illness are more likely to be the victims of firearms violence than they are to be the perpetrators. The book, my other book, Why the Firearms Laws Are What They Are, covers a lot of this. There's a whole chapter that I did on mental health for this reason. People have a lot of misperceptions about mental health and firearms. And I anchor my comments in a lot of the research that was done. There was some great work done by two psychiatrists out at Pitt that I make reference to, and I give citations for everything I assert in that book. I give citations. People can go read the original source literature themselves. But if any of your listeners or viewers decide that they want to have a conversation about this sort of stuff, I can come in and in 1 hour I can give a primer on why the gun laws are what they are.
Wow.
Yeah.
I know that we're under a time constraint. Okay?
Today, maybe.
Yeah, but I do want to ask you, and we'll continue until that time that we talked about, if you would come back.
Sure.
Because
Happy to do it.
I would like to, also, if there's any comments, if you have any comments on YouTube or TikTok or Spotify or anything like that, please write them in Instagram so that we can discuss it when you come back.
Sure. Happy to do it. Happy
Jonathan?
to take questions directly. People can also go to my website, which is goldsteinlp.com, which is my law firm. They can write to me on there and ask me questions. I'm happy to be in dialogue with folks.
It's great
Yeah.
because I want to continue this.
Sure.
But I also want you to address, because that's another hour to discuss your businesses and how you started them, acquire them, because I was with you when I helped you find someone to
buy a part of a business I was involved in.
Yeah. So this is all fascinating. But as we talk about the Constitution, which, by the way, does affect business.
Of course.
I have an international friend that I do business with, and he called me. He's coming to the United States and to work on doing some things here with me. And he said, well, how do we handle it? What do we do?
Right.
And I said, well, this is what you have to do. You have to do this, you have to do this,
Right.
you have to do this, and you have to do this. Should we have this form or this form or this form? I said, come here, we'll talk about it. I will give you my advice. We'll do it together. We'll go to a bank. We'll get everything together.
Right.
But in a lot of places, it's not like that. I mean, it's like you got to go through all these government hoops and all jump through a million things. And I want to talk to you about that in another episode because I still have questions
Sure,
for you
happy to do it.
about gun control.
Sure, happy to do it.
Or lack thereof.
Of course.
So when you look at weapons, okay, which is what we called it in the Army. I mean,
Yeah.
you didn't say, you didn't. I don't remember even calling it a gun. You
Right.
said my weapon.
Right.
Okay, so even though everybody said where's your gun and everything else, but officially you said it's your weapon.
A rifle, right?
A rifle.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's always a rifle. I think it was an M16 back then, but it could have been an M1. I think it was an
Grand,
M16.
yeah.
What are the regulations for firing ranges? For firing ranges for pistols, for revolvers, and the difference between a pistol and a revolver.
Sure.
People don't know, but I know. But and then firing ranges for long guns, for
Sure.
rifles.
So in Pennsylvania, we have gun laws, right, are codified in what's called the Uniform Firearms Act,
Okay.
which can be found in our criminal statutes at 18 PACS 6101, as we say, et sec, and the rest, right? So it goes from 6101 all the way down through a couple of chapters, okay? And in that Uniform Firearms Act, right, Uniform Firearms Act, we have a definition of the word firearm in, at last count, I think it was 15 places.
Wow.
So you have 15 definitions of the word firearm in the Uniform Firearms Act. I have begged, I have pleaded with legislators to actually put a uniform definition, and nobody wants to do it because the prosecutors love the local definitions of firearms that are littered throughout it because they use it for various kinds of prosecution with which they're
cherry-pick it.
comfortable. Exactly.
Okay.
So, broadly speaking, in Pennsylvania, a firearm is a handgun,
Okay.
which is a gun that is measured basically in terms of its overall length and its barrel length. A pistol doesn't really have a definition. A revolver is a gun that has a cylinder that turns with the click of each trigger and brings a new, fresh round of ammunition into battery so that a firing pin can hit it and launch the bullet out of the cartridge down the barrel and out towards its target. A semi-automatic handgun is a magazine-fed firearm where the action of a slide moving back and forth brings a new round, a fresh round off of a magazine into battery so that it can be discharged. So those are all considered firearms in Pennsylvania, handguns, a gun that can be controlled with a single hand. Everything else is a long gun, right? That would be your rifles and your shotguns. Broadly speaking, it is illegal to have a loaded long gun, rifle or shotgun, in a vehicle, okay? If you have a license to carry a firearm, which is issued by your county sheriff or by the police department in cities of the first class, of which there are only one in Pennsylvania, that's Philadelphia. In cities of the first class, those licenses to carry firearms are issued by the police department, chief of police.
But you can use them throughout the state.
It's a license that's good statewide for the concealed carry of a firearm anywhere in the state or for the open carry of a firearm in Philadelphia. Open carry of a firearm is legal everywhere in Pennsylvania except in Philadelphia, which creates the curious phenomenon in Philadelphia, and it's the only thing I'm aware of under the law, where you're committing a legal act, not an illegal act, but a legal act if you are carrying a firearm openly in Philadelphia pursuant to a license that you possess, creates probable cause for a police officer to stop you, because you can only carry an open carry firearm in Philadelphia if you have that license. So can they stop you to see if you have that license if you're open carrying? It's a very curious circumstance in the city of Philadelphia.
Well, wait a minute. But if you have concealed carry,
They cannot stop you.
they cannot.
But if you open carry in Philadelphia, because you can only open carry with the license, can they stop you to see if you have that license? So
Wow.
it would be like the commission of a legal act gives them what they need to stop you. It would be like saying only people who have driver's licenses could drive cars. So if you're driving a car, can we stop you to see if you have the driver's license? Right?
Wow. Yeah.
Weird.
Okay.
So anyway, that's the licensing regime. Now you asked about ranges.
Right.
A range is licensed to allow somebody to fire most of the time any kind of gun. Some have traditionally, historically, only been configured for the use of, for example, a shotgun, right? So there are clubs all around the state that are shotgun-only clubs that have only ever been configured. If they wanted to reconfigure to allow for the firing of a rifle, they would need a new berm, they might need new, if there's a noise ordinance in that community. And the anti-gun left has consistently thwarted at every turn the building of new ranges, because their theory is if there's nowhere for people to practice with firearms, if you have to drive an hour to go practice with a firearm, fewer people will use them. And it's been a way for them to choke off the supply of training, even though every time you ask them, oh, no, we're very much in favor of legal gun ownership. Great, we want to put a range here. Oh, sorry, you can't. The county of Philadelphia, for example, only 1.3%, 1.6%, maybe less, of the county's zoning code allows for the placement of a firing range.
Wow.
You can only put it in an industrial area. No residential areas, no commercial district. You can no longer open a gun store in a commercial strip or a commercial mall. It has to be in an industrial zone.
But
Out of sight, out of mind.
Suppose your range or your store was there and they built around it.
So there are a handful of stores, and I represent several of them, that the city has been trying to close that pre-exist this. Let me give you an example. There is a shooting range in Northeast Philadelphia. It's an outdoor range. It's part of a club. I'm not going to name the club.
Okay.
And they have shotgun shooting. And the club was recently reinvigorated, but with a big investment that was made in the facility. And they started to shoot more.
Mm-hmm.
And the nearby neighbors thought, oh, we're gonna close this. We don't want all this shooting. Too much noise. The club has existed prior to the city of Philadelphia adopting a noise ordinance. State law says that if your club existed prior to the adoption of the noise ordinance, you're exempt from it. So you can create noise from your gun range anytime, night or day.
Wow.
Notwithstanding the fact that there's a noise ordinance, okay? So the neighbors go after this club, and I say to them, look, we're going to win. You know, they're suing, they're calling the EPA for lead, they're raising hell and high water. I said, we're going to prevail. And once we prevail, you can expect breakfast shoots, twilight shoots, Saturday morning shoots, lunch shoots, night shoots, day shoots, evening shoots. Once we prevail and we are unfettered by any kind of a negotiated arrangement, their consistent complaint was too much noise. Did I mention that the range was under the glide path of one of the runways at Northeast Philadelphia Airport? Okay, so the airport pre-existed this neighborhood.
Right.
The gun range pre-exists this neighborhood. All these people move into this neighborhood and discover that there's gambling at Rick's, that there is a gun range and an airport here in our quiet neighborhood. It's nonsense, right?
Yeah.
These people all knew they were moving in next to a gun club. They knew they were moving in under an airport runway. You can't then complain about who put all this noise here.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, I get it.
And so when new ranges go to be formed up, when people try to place, additional use in ranges, I'm unsympathetic to the noise excuse.
Well, some ranges only allow pistols and
Some do. Some only allow shotgun.
Right.
Some only allow rifles below a particular caliber. Some of them say all the rifle shooting has to happen over here, aimed this way. maybe those are reasonable restrictions. Reasonable minds can differ, but sure.
And I have heard of some where it's only pistols and revolvers and no automatic or even
automatic fire scares the soccer moms.
Yeah.
So they try to be, and look, maybe there's a time and a place for using automatic weapons. Maybe there isn't. I'm a member of a range out in Lancaster County, which has, lots of land and lots of places to do that stuff. But again, if we want civilians to be familiar with the kinds of firearms that they would be expected to be familiar with to come into militia service, to be summoned to National Guard duty, to be summoned to what's called the posse comitatus, right, which is the power of the county. That was the way that people, a posse, we're going to form up a posse. That's
right.
An ancient power that county sheriffs could use, right?
Wow.
So the county sheriff, the notion of a county sheriff,
right.
What does that word come from? It comes from the Old English, shire reeve. Who was the shire reeve? The shire reeve in England was the king's representative in a shire, a county, right? In America, we inherited the notion of a shire reeve, a sheriff. A sheriff is, in almost every county in the country, the highest elected law enforcement officer. Why do we elect sheriffs? Isn't that kind of a weird thing to do, right? We elect them because the shire reeve has the ability to call out, to summon to his service the power of the county, the armed populace, to assist him with law enforcement.
And there is a sheriff in Philadelphia.
And in every county who we elect. And we elect him because we want to make sure we have the ability to control a person who could call out the awesome, awesome power of the armed populace for law enforcement purposes.
It's amazing. I never knew that, by the way, and I'm sure most of our viewers and listeners never knew that. The fact that and when you were speaking about neighbors wanting to close down ranges, but at the same time, therefore, they may not be against gun control. Okay,
right?
Okay, but if you do away with places to practice,
you'll have no.
That is very dangerous.
Very dangerous.
Because you're going to have a whole bunch of people who have guns that don't know what to do with them, and may wind up shooting themselves or somebody near them.
100%. And I say this when I'm negotiating with anti-gun people about changes to the gun laws. I tell them, you want more ranges. You want places. People are going to buy guns.
Right.
Period, full stop. Okay?
Yep.
Do you want those people never having practiced with them, never having got an NRA basic pistol class, where we teach them that this is the business end of it, this is how you check if it's unloaded, this is how you know whether it's, or do you want them to know those things? And you have to let us have some ranges, but they can't get out of their own way. They can't actually complete the thought that that they're not against guns, but if there's places for people to practice, people might actually learn something about it. And I tell them, you really have to decide. As my grandmother would say, "Tuchas auf den Tisch." Put your ass on the table, right? And actually commit.
My grandmother used to say the same thing.
Of course, "Tuchas auf den Tisch."
So now, okay, as we are seeing what's happening around the world, okay, and there are people who want to control the guns, take the guns away. Then there are people who want more guns. It will be interesting to see the progression of where this goes. And I think in the United States, it's firmly entrenched, but you never know.
Gun control is people control. That's what it is, okay? And when you look, for example, at the place where a lot of this gun control is happening, where the impetus for it is coming from, it's the EU, right?
Yeah.
We, NRA, sends representatives. We have a couple of guys that go pretty regularly to these international arms conferences. All of this gun control is flowing out of the same place that you see this kind of roll it up, one world government, we want a government up here and not down here. And we fought via Magna Carta, via the Glorious Revolution, via the American Revolution, for government to be close to the governed, You want you want Congress to be the most powerful branch of government because it's the branch of government that is closest to the people, right? Where the people have the most input, the most say in how they are governed. Governments, legitimate governments, rest on the consent of the governed. And what you see in Europe is people electing parliaments that elect parliaments that elect parliaments that elect parliaments, and up here is where they want to make all the decisions. Well, of course you want to make all the decisions up there, because that's where you get to be king, and you don't have to deal with all these smelly civilians that want input.
Yeah.
And the problem is, you're seeing it writ large across all this unrest in Europe, is the people want to be heard. You mentioned the Bastille earlier. The people will be heard. And they will be heard through the ballot box, or they will be heard via other means. And the one world government folks, the folks that want to abstract all this power away from the people, will find that over time, the people are not quite as interested in that as the one world government folks are.
I have to tell you, this has been amazing.
Thank you. You're very kind.
Amazing.
Don't feed the bears. My wife says, don't feed the bears or you'll never get rid of the bears. You put out a picnic table, you tell the bear he looks good and he's welcome to eat all the honey. The bear won't leave.
Well, I know the time limit when you said you have a constraint.
Yeah.
But I would love you to come back to talk about your business and the businesses that you acquire,
of course,
and the businesses that you own, how you got into that,
sure,
how you do all these things. That's really another hour and a half, really.
Sure.
So, Jonathan Goldstein, lawyer.
True.
Entrepreneur.
Also true.
Person on the board of the NRA.
Also true.
Okay. And just a wonderful guy.
Oh, you're very kind. Maybe not true. Father, husband, also true.
But I want our listeners and viewers, if they have any questions, how do they get a hold of you?
Go to my website and just send an email through that, and it'll get to me.
And the website again is?
www.goldsteinlp.com. So Goldstein Law Partners, goldsteinlp.com.
Spell it out.
GOLDSTEIN LP, limapapa.com.
Perfect. Why do I want to say something in Latin? Here's the thing. Jonathan.
Thank you.
Man,
this
thank
was great.
you so much.
Appreciate you having me in. This was a pleasure.
It's terrific. Terrific.
Rare is the opportunity to talk about the letters of marque and reprisal, so thank you.
That's true. I love that. That was great. That was great. My friends, episode 68, Jonathan Goldstein. Well, this was a real lesson on the Second Amendment and all the things that impact it one way or the other, and the people that are impacting it one way or the other. Folks, don't forget, subscribe on YouTube, follow us on Instagram, on TikTok, on what am I missing? Oh, Spotify. Correct. On Spotify. And you can just go to dangoldberg.com and click on those icons. And remember this, use your mind. If you don't, others will. We'll see you next time on Digging for Gold.